The mahogany conference room smelled like old money and fresh betrayal when they walked in. Patricia and Robert Chen, the people who had called themselves my parents for 8 years, before vanishing from my life like smoke, stood in the doorway of Eleanor Blackwood's law office, wearing expensive clothes and nervous smiles, as if 18 years of silence could be erased with the right outfit and enough audacity. "Callie, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice carrying that same artificial warmth I remembered from childhood. Her blonde hair was shorter now, silver threading through it like expensive wire, and her face had the kind of smoothness that came from good genetics and better surgeons. "You look wonderful." I stayed seated at the polished conference table, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. At 26, I'd built a life that didn't include them. A job I loved as a graphic designer, a small apartment in Portland that I'd painted 3 times until the colors felt like home, a boyfriend named Jake who knew about my abandonment issues and loved me anyway. I'd spent nearly 2 decades learning to exist without them, and now they were here, standing in my Uncle Marcus's lawyer's office, like they had every right to be present for the reading of his will. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Robert stepped forward, his gray suit perfectly tailored, his smile the practiced charm of someone who'd learned to navigate difficult conversations. "We're still your family, Callie. Despite everything that happened, despite the time that's passed, we're still your parents. You stopped being my parents the day you dropped me off at child services and never came back." The words hung in the room like an accusation, which is exactly what they were. Eleanor Blackwood cleared her throat from behind her desk, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Perhaps we should begin," she said diplomatically. "I understand this is an emotionally charged situation for everyone involved. I'd met Eleanor only once before, at Uncle Marcus's funeral 3 weeks ago. She'd been professional then, offering condolences and scheduling this meeting to discuss his estate. I'd expected a modest inheritance, maybe enough to pay off my student loans, possibly a few $1,000s and some family photographs. Uncle Marcus had been comfortable but not wealthy, or so I'd thought. "Marcus Rivera's will is quite straightforward in most respects," Eleanor began, opening a thick folder. "He was very specific about his wishes and the reasoning behind them." Patricia and Robert had settled into chairs across from me, and I could feel their attention like heat from a fire I didn't want to be near. They'd aged well, I noticed with irritation. Whatever had happened to them after they'd abandoned me had apparently involved good health care and stress-free living. "To my beloved niece, Callie Martinez," Eleanor read, "I leave my entire estate, including all financial assets totaling approximately $15 million, as well as my residence at 1247 Ocean View Drive in Mendocino, California." The number hit me like a physical blow. $15 million. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck, declining Jake's offers to pay for dinner because I was too proud to admit I was struggling. And my uncle, who had visited maybe twice a year and always seemed kind but distant, had been sitting on $15 million. "There must be some mistake," Robert said, his voice sharp with disbelief. $15 million? Marcus was a teacher. How could he possibly? "Mr. Rivera made some very successful investments over the years," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "The will is quite clear and legally binding." Patricia leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped. "Of course we're happy for Callie, but surely there's something for us as well. We were Marcus's family too. We helped raise Callie for 8 years. "Actually," Eleanor said, and something in her tone made my stomach clench with anticipation, "that brings us to an important matter that needs to be addressed before we can proceed with the estate transfer." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, setting it on the table with the reverence of someone handling evidence. Marcus was very thorough in his final preparations. He wanted to ensure that certain truths came to light. "Callie, the people sitting across from you are not your biological parents." The room went completely silent except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at Eleanor, certain I'd misheard her. "What did you say?" "DNA tests were conducted several months ago, at Marcus's request. Patricia and Robert Chen are not related to you by blood." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Furthermore, Marcus left detailed documentation explaining the true circumstances of your childhood and why these individuals were involved in your early life." I turned to look at Patricia and Robert, who had gone pale as winter sky. Patricia's hand was pressed to her mouth, and Robert was staring at the envelope like it contained a bomb. "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I said it, memories were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The way they'd sometimes seemed awkward with me, like they were playing roles they'd never quite mastered. The strange formality that had always existed between us, even in moments that should have been intimate. "I'm afraid it's quite true," Eleanor said, And it's only the beginning of what Marcus wanted you to know. The memory of that day still lived in my bones like a fracture that never healed properly. I was 8 years old, standing in the fluorescent-lit lobby of the Oregon Department of Human Services with a pink backpack that contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a stuffed elephant named Peanut, and a drawing I'd made of our family that no longer existed. "This is just temporary, sweetheart," Patricia had said, kneeling down to my eye level. Her hands were shaking as she smoothed my dark hair, and there were tears in her eyes that she kept blinking away. "Mommy and Daddy have to go away for a while, but we'll come back for you. I promise." Even at 8, I'd known it was a lie. Children have an instinct for detecting adult deception, a survival mechanism that kicks in when their world becomes unstable. The way Robert wouldn't meet my eyes, the speed with which they'd packed my things, the hushed phone conversations that had been happening for weeks, all of it screamed finality. "When will you come back?" I'd asked, clutching Peanut against my chest. "Soon, baby. Very soon." But soon never came. Days turned into weeks into months, and eventually, I stopped looking for their faces in every car that passed the group home where I'd been placed. I stopped jumping when the phone rang, stopped asking my caseworker if there had been any word from my parents. Sofia Martinez found me 6 months later. I'd been moved to a foster home by then, a decent place run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson, who treated the 5 children in her care with efficient kindness but little warmth. We were her job, not her family, and she made sure we understood the distinction. Sofia was different. She walked into Mrs. Henderson's living room on a rainy Tuesday morning, and I knew immediately that she was someone special. She was small and sturdy, with graying black hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore jeans and a sweater that looked hand-knitted, and she smelled like vanilla and something else I couldn't identify. Later, I learned it was the scent of fresh bread from the bakery she owned. "Which one is Callie?" she'd asked Mrs. Henderson, and when I raised my hand tentatively, she'd smiled at me like I was exactly what she'd been looking for. The interview process took 3 weeks. Sofia visited me 5 times, bringing books and art supplies, and an endless supply of patience. She never asked me about Patricia and Robert directly, but she listened when I talked about them, nodding without judgment when I admitted that I was angry at them for leaving, scared that I'd done something wrong to make them go away. "Sometimes," she told me on her 4th visit, "adults have to make impossible choices. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means the world is more complicated than children should have to understand." "Do you think they'll come back?" I'd asked. Sofia had considered this seriously, the way she considered all my questions. "I don't know, Mija, but I know that you deserve to be loved and cared for right now, today, regardless of what they might or might not do." The day I moved into Sofia's house was the first time in months that I'd felt like I could breathe properly. Her home was small but warm, filled with the kind of clutter that spoke of a life being actively lived. Books stacked on every surface, paintings in various stages of completion propped against walls, the lingering sense of whatever she'd been baking that morning. "This is your room," she'd said, opening a door to reveal a space that was clearly meant for a child but didn't feel temporary. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and there was a bookshelf already half filled with age-appropriate novels, a desk by the window where morning light streamed through cheerful curtains. "Is this really mine?" I'd asked. "For as long as you want it to be." Sofia never tried to replace Patricia and Robert. She never asked me to call her mom, or pretended that my history hadn't happened. Instead, she created new traditions, new memories that belonged only to us. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals, evening walks around the neighborhood where she taught me to identify different types of flowers, art projects that covered her kitchen table and stayed there for weeks, because my creativity was more important than having a perfectly clean house. When the nightmares came, and they did come, regularly, for the first 2 years, Sofia would sit beside my bed and tell me stories about her childhood in Mexico, about her grandmother who could predict the weather by watching birds, about the importance of making beautiful things even when the world felt ugly. "You are not broken, Callie," she would say on the nights when I cried until I made myself sick. "You are not abandoned. You are here, with me, and that is not an accident. That is love." It took 3 years before I stopped flinching when adults raised their voices, 5 years before I stopped hoarding food in my room, terrified that dinner might disappear without warning, 7 years before I could form real friendships without constantly preparing for the moment when people would leave. But Sofia never left. Even when I tested her patience, even when I was difficult or distant or angry at the world, she stayed. She taught me that love wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice, made new every day. Uncle Marcus showed up for the first time when I was 11, 3 years after Sophia had legally adopted me, and I'd finally begun to believe that some adults actually meant it when they promised to stay. He knocked on our front door on a Saturday morning in October, carrying flowers for Sophia and a wooden puzzle box that would take me weeks to solve. "You must be Callie," he'd said, crouching down to my eye level with the same careful attention Sophia always gave to children. He was tall and lean, with dark hair just beginning to show silver at the temples, and eyes the same warm brown as mine. "I've heard so many wonderful things about you." I'd hidden behind Sophia's legs, still uncertain about new adults despite years of feeling safe in her care. But there was something about Marcus that felt familiar, like a melody I'd heard before but couldn't quite place. "Marcus was a friend of Patricia and Robert's," Sophia had explained later, after he'd spent the afternoon teaching me card tricks and helping her fix a loose cabinet door. "He wanted to make sure you were okay." That was the story for years. Uncle Marcus was a family friend who cared about my well-being. He visited every few months, always bringing thoughtful gifts, books by authors I'd never heard of but immediately loved, art supplies that were just slightly more advanced than what I was used to, a leather journal where I could write down my thoughts and dreams. Unlike the caseworkers and therapists who had paraded through my life in those early years, Marcus never asked probing questions about my feelings or tried to fix me. Instead, he listened. When I told him about learning to bake with Sophia, he asked for detailed descriptions of the recipes. When I showed him drawings I'd made, he studied them with the attention of someone who genuinely appreciated art. "You have a good eye for color," he told me when I was 13, examining a watercolor painting I'd done of our garden. "See how you've used the blue-green in the shadows? That's sophisticated thinking. Sophia taught me that. Sophia taught you the technique, the seeing. That's all you." As I got older, our conversations became more complex. Marcus would bring newspaper articles about social issues and ask what I thought, listening to my teenage opinions with the same respect he might give to a colleague. He helped me with my college applications, reading my essays and offering suggestions that made my writing stronger without making it sound like someone else had written it. "What do you want to study?" he'd asked during one of his visits my senior year of high school. "Art and design, maybe. Sophia thinks I should have a practical backup plan, but I feel like I need to make beautiful things." Does that sound stupid? It sounds honest, and honesty is never stupid. He'd helped me research design programs, connecting me with a scholarship I'd never heard of that covered most of my tuition at Portland State. When I asked how he'd known about it, he just smiled and said he kept track of opportunities for young people. There were always mysteries about Marcus. He never talked about his work beyond saying he was in business, never mentioned a family of his own, never stayed in town longer than a few days at a time. Sophia seemed to know more about him than she shared with me, and sometimes I caught them having quiet conversations that stopped when I entered the room. "Is Uncle Marcus really my uncle?" I'd asked Sophia once when I was 16, trying to puzzle out the complex web of relationships that had shaped my childhood. "Family isn't always about blood, Mija. You know that better than most people." It was a non-answer that felt like an answer, the way many of Sophia's responses did. I'd learned to accept that some things about my past would always be mysterious, that the adults who loved me had their own complicated histories that they weren't ready to share. What mattered was that Marcus was consistent. Through high school graduation, through my struggles in college, through the anxiety attacks that still sometimes overwhelmed me when I felt like people were going to leave, Marcus was a steady presence. He remembered details about my life that even close friends forgot. He celebrated my successes and offered perspective during my failures. "You're stronger than you know, Callie," he told me, after a particularly difficult breakup my junior year. "You've survived things that would break most people, and you've done it with grace and kindness intact. That's not common. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's continuing to build a life worth living despite both." The last time I saw Marcus was 3 months before he died. He'd taken me to dinner at an expensive restaurant in Portland, the kind of place I'd never been able to afford on my own. He seemed different that night, more serious, almost sad. "I want you to know," he'd said over dessert, "that everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been about keeping you safe and making sure you had the life you deserved. Marcus, you're scaring me. Are you sick?" "No, sweetheart. I'm just proud of who you've become. And I want to make sure you know that." Eleanor's office felt smaller than it had an hour ago, as if the walls were contracting under the weight of revelations. I stared at the DNA test results she'd placed in front of me, black letters on white paper that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my identity. "This is impossible," I whispered, but the evidence was right there. 0% probability that Patricia Chen was my biological mother. 0% probability that Robert Chen was my biological father. Patricia was crying now, quiet tears that she dabbed at with a tissue. Callie, we can explain. Can you? I turned to face them, anger rising in my chest like a tide. Because I've spent 18 years believing you abandoned me, because I wasn't good enough, wasn't worth staying for. And now you're telling me I was never even yours to begin with? It's not that simple, Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. We loved you. From the moment you came into our lives, we loved you like our own daughter. Then why did you leave me? Eleanor cleared her throat, drawing our attention back to the documents spread across her desk. Perhaps I should explain what Marcus left for you to understand. He was very thorough in documenting the circumstances. She opened another folder, this one thick with photographs, legal documents, and handwritten letters. Callie, Marcus Rivera wasn't your uncle. He was your biological father. The room tilted around me. I gripped the arms of my chair, fighting the sensation that I was falling through space. What? Your biological mother was a woman named Carmen Delgado. She died in a car accident when you were 6 months old. Marcus was devastated by her loss, but he was also in a very dangerous situation. Eleanor pulled out a photograph, a beautiful young woman with dark hair and my eyes, holding a baby who was unmistakably me. My throat closed with emotion I couldn't name. Marcus was involved in business dealings that had attracted the attention of some very dangerous people. He'd been trying to extricate himself from these relationships, but they weren't the kind of people who accepted resignations. When Carmen died, Marcus realized that being publicly known as your father would put you in immediate danger. So he hired us, Patricia said quietly. Marcus needed people who could take care of you, love you, protect you by giving you a completely different identity. You were actors, I said, the pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. We were federal agents, Robert corrected, specialized in witness protection and deep cover operations. But Callie, what started as an assignment became real. You became real to us. Eleanor nodded, confirming their story. Marcus couldn't be your father publicly, but he could be your uncle. He could visit you, watch you grow up, make sure you were safe and cared for. I thought about all those visits, the way Marcus had looked at me with such intensity, such pride. Not the casual affection of an uncle, but the fierce love of a parent who could only watch from the shadows. The puzzle box, I said suddenly, the one he brought me when I was 11. It took me weeks to solve, and when I finally opened it, there was a note inside that said, "Patience and persistence reveal all secrets." He was preparing you, Eleanor said, teaching you to think, to question, to be strong enough to handle difficult truths. Why didn't he just tell me, after I grew up, after I was safe with Sophia? Because the danger never ended, Patricia said. The people Marcus was trying to escape, they have long memories and longer reach. As long as they believed you were dead or had disappeared into the system, you were safe. But I wasn't dead. I was right here, in Portland, living my life, living under an assumed name with a completely fabricated background, Robert explained. Callie Martinez didn't exist until you were 8 years old. Your birth certificate, your social security number, your entire legal identity was created as part of your protection. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Who am I then? What's my real name? Eleanor consulted the documents. Carolina Rivera. You were born in San Diego on March 15, 1998, to Marcus Rivera and Carmen Delgado. Carolina Rivera. The name felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd forgotten I knew. Why now? I asked. Why reveal all of this after Marcus died? Because the situation has changed, Eleanor said gravely. Marcus's death wasn't natural. He was murdered, and the people responsible know about you now. The inheritance isn't just money and property. It's also evidence, documentation of criminal activities that could bring down some very powerful people. My blood turned to ice water. He was murdered. The autopsy revealed traces of a rare toxin. Marcus knew he was in danger, which is why he made these arrangements. The will, the DNA tests, all the documentation. He was preparing for the possibility that he wouldn't be able to protect you anymore. I looked at Patricia and Robert, understanding dawning. That's why you came to the will reading. Not for money. We came because we got word that Marcus was dead, and that people were looking for you, Patricia said. We've been monitoring the situation for years, ready to step back into your life if you were ever in danger. Even though I hate you for leaving me, Robert's voice broke slightly. Even then, because we meant it when we said we loved you, Callie. That was never a lie. Eleanor's conference room had become a war room. Documents spread across the table like battle plans. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows as we pieced together the truth about Marcus Rivera's life and mine. Your father was brilliant, Eleanor said, pulling out financial records that documented Marcus's rise from college professor to millionaire investor. He started as an economics professor at UC San Diego, but he had an exceptional gift for understanding market patterns and investment opportunities. The photographs she showed me revealed a man I'd never known existed beneath the kind uncle who'd visited me throughout my childhood. Marcus in expensive suits, shaking hands with politicians. Marcus at charity galas, always with different elegant women on his arm, but never looking truly happy. Marcus in boardrooms, his expression sharp and calculating. He made his first million by age 30, Eleanor continued. Real estate investments in California during the tech boom. But success attracted attention from people who wanted to use his expertise for less legitimate purposes. She pulled out a photograph that made my stomach clench. Marcus standing next to a man with cold eyes and an expensive smile, both of them in front of a luxury yacht. Vincent Castellano, Eleanor said. Marcus's business partner for nearly 10 years, and the source of all the danger that followed. What kind of business? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Money laundering initially. Castellano had various enterprises that generated large amounts of cash that needed to be cleaned through legitimate investments. Marcus's gift for the stock market made him invaluable for that process. Patricia leaned forward. Marcus didn't know what he was getting into at first. Castellano presented himself as a businessman who needed help managing international investments. But my father figured it out. By the time he understood what Castellano really was, Marcus was already in too deep, Robert said. He'd been laundering money for drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, people who don't accept resignation letters. Eleanor showed me more documents, bank transfers, shell company formations, investment portfolios that were clearly designed to obscure the source of funds. Marcus's handwriting filled the margins of many pages, notes that revealed his growing horror at what he'd become part of. When did he meet my mother? I asked. Eleanor's expression softened. Carmen was a social worker who was investigating one of Castellano's front organizations, a charity that claimed to help immigrant families, but was actually being used to traffic people. She was brilliant, fearless, and completely dedicated to protecting vulnerable people. She showed me more photographs. Carmen at work, Carmen laughing with friends, Carmen and Marcus together looking genuinely happy for the first time in any of the pictures I'd seen. Marcus fell in love with her immediately, Eleanor said. But he was also terrified because he knew that being associated with him put her in danger. Did she know about his business with Castellano? Eventually. Marcus tried to keep it from her, but Carmen was too smart and too persistent. When she found out, she didn't run. Instead, she helped him develop a plan to gather evidence against Castellano and get out. The next documents were more damaging. Detailed records of Castellano's operations, photographs of meetings, audio transcripts that had clearly been recorded secretly. Marcus and Carmen had been building a case that could have destroyed Castellano's entire network. Then Carmen got pregnant, Patricia said quietly. With you. Everything changed, Eleanor continued. Marcus realized that he wasn't just risking his own life anymore, or even Carmen's. He was risking his child's future. So what happened? They accelerated their timeline. Marcus was going to turn everything over to the FBI, enter witness protection with Carmen and you, and start over somewhere safe. But Carmen died. The car accident was no accident, Robert said grimly. Castellano had discovered what they were doing. Carmen was driving to a meeting with federal agents when her brakes failed. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my ragged breathing. My mother had been murdered because she'd tried to help my father escape the consequences of his choices. Marcus was destroyed, Eleanor said. He blamed himself completely, but he still had you to protect, and he still had evidence that could bring down the people who killed Carmen. So he faked my death too. Not exactly. He created an elaborate plan where you would disappear into the system under a different identity, while he stayed in the public eye to draw Castellano's attention away from you. Patricia opened another folder. We were already working with the FBI on Castellano's case. When Marcus approached them about protecting you, they asked us to take the assignment. You were supposed to hide me for how long? Until Castellano was either arrested or eliminated as a threat, Robert said. But Castellano was careful, smart. The evidence Marcus had was enough to prove criminal activity, but not enough to ensure conviction. And without Carmen's testimony, the case fell apart, I finished. Marcus refused to let you live in hiding forever, Eleanor said. So he developed a new plan. He would live publicly as Marcus Rivera, businessman and philanthropist, while secretly continuing to gather evidence against Castellano. You would live safely as Cali Martinez, with no connection to the Rivera name, for 18 years, until he had enough evidence to finally destroy Castellano completely. The The $15 million you've inherited. It's not just money. It's leverage. Proof of every illegal transaction, every criminal partnership, every murder Castellano has been involved in. Ew. We never meant for it to hurt you the way it did, Patricia said, her voice thick with tears, as Eleanor stepped out to make phone calls, leaving the three of us alone in the conference room. The plan was never supposed to last 8 years. I studied her face, searching for traces of the woman who had tucked me into bed and helped me with homework and made me believe I was loved. She looked older now, worn by years of carrying secrets, but her eyes held the same gentleness I remembered from childhood. What was the plan then? Robert pulled out a worn manila folder from his briefcase. Initially, we were told it would be 6 months, maybe a year, long enough for Marcus to finalize the evidence against Castellano and for the FBI to build an airtight case. He opened the folder to reveal photographs of us together, me as a small child, laughing on swings, blowing out birthday candles, curled up between them reading bedtime stories. The pictures looked like a real family, and the expressions on our faces were genuine. "These aren't staged," I said, confused. "No," Patricia said softly. "They're not. Callie, when we took this assignment, we thought we were protecting a child we'd care for temporarily. We didn't expect to fall in love with you. You were 6 months old when we took custody of you," Robert added. "You'd been in foster care since Carmen's death, and you were so small, so quiet, like you already understood that the world was dangerous." Patricia reached across the table, then stopped herself, her hand hovering in the air between us. "You had nightmares every night for months. You wouldn't let anyone put you down, wouldn't sleep alone. I started sleeping in the nursery with you, just so you'd feel safe. We were supposed to maintain emotional distance," Robert said. "It's a basic rule of protective custody, but you were this incredibly bright, sweet child, and every day with you felt like a gift we didn't deserve. Then why did you leave me?" The question hung between us like an accusation. Patricia closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with pain. "Because keeping you was going to get you killed." Robert pulled out more documents. FBI reports, surveillance photos, threat assessments. By the time you were 7, Castellano's people had started getting suspicious. They'd noticed that Marcus Rivera was asking questions about Carmen's death, that he was meeting with people who might be federal agents. They started watching him more closely. Patricia continued, "And Marcus realized that if they ever connected you to him, if they ever figured out that Carolina Rivera hadn't actually died, they would have killed me. They would have killed all of us," Robert said. "But more importantly to Marcus, they would have killed you just to hurt him." I thought about the child I'd been at 7, trusting, happy despite my mysterious nightmares, completely unaware that my entire existence was built on lies designed to keep me alive. "So Marcus asked us to do the hardest thing we'd ever done," Patricia said. "He asked us to break your heart to save your life. The abandonment was staged?" "Every detail was planned," Robert confirmed. "We had to make it look real, not just to you, but to anyone who might be watching. If Castellano's people ever investigated your background, they had to find evidence of parents who had genuinely abandoned their child, not federal agents running a protection operation." Patricia was crying again, but she didn't try to hide it this time. "Do you know how many times I wanted to come back for you? How many nights I lay awake wondering if you were okay? If you understood that leaving you was the hardest thing I'd ever done." "We monitored your situation constantly," Robert said. "When you were placed with Sofia Martinez, we investigated her thoroughly. When we realized she was exactly the kind of person who could give you the stable, loving home you deserved, we were grateful, but also jealous." "Jealous?" "Sofia got to be your mother," Patricia said simply. "She got to watch you grow up, celebrate your achievements, comfort you when you were hurt. She got to love you openly while we had to love you from the shadows." I stared at them, these people who had shaped my entire understanding of abandonment and betrayal, trying to reconcile their explanation with the pain I'd carried for 18 years. "Did Marcus know about how much it hurt me?" "It destroyed him," Robert said. "Every time he visited you, every time he saw how the abandonment had affected you, he questioned whether we'd made the right choice. But the alternative was your death," Patricia added. "And none of us could live with that possibility." Eleanor returned to the room, her expression grim. "I've just spoken with Detective Hoffman, who's investigating Marcus's murder. Castellano's people are definitely looking for Callie. They've been asking questions in Portland, showing her photograph around." My blood turned cold. "They know where I live? They know who you are now, yes. Marcus's death drew their attention, and they've connected Carolina Rivera to Callie Martinez." Robert stood up, his demeanor shifting from grieving father figure to professional protector. "We need to move her immediately." "Move me where?" Patricia reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. somewhere safe, until we can end this permanently. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in the suburbs of Sacramento, the kind of place that disappeared into middle-class anonymity by design. Detective Ray Hoffman met us there at midnight, a rumpled man in his 50s with tired eyes, and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything anymore. Vincent Castellano isn't just a criminal, he explained as we sat around the kitchen table, surrounded by case files and evidence boxes. He's the head of one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in the country. Your father spent 15 years gathering evidence against him. The photographs Detective Hoffman showed me were like looking into a different world, one where violence was a business tool and human life was just another commodity to be bought and sold. Castellano appeared in dozens of surveillance photos, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by people who looked like they'd been hired for their capacity for violence. Marcus was brilliant at walking the line, Hoffman continued. He gave Castellano just enough cooperation to stay alive while secretly documenting everything: bank records, meeting transcripts, photographs of illegal transactions. He was building the most comprehensive case against a criminal organization that I've ever seen. Why didn't he just turn it all over to the FBI? I asked. Because Castellano had people inside the FBI, Robert said grimly. And in the DEA, the U.S. Attorney's Office, even local police departments. Marcus couldn't trust anyone in law enforcement completely. Eleanor opened another box, this one filled with computer drives and encrypted files. So he did what economists do best. He created a system. Multiple layers of evidence stored in different locations, with different people, accessible only when certain conditions were met. Like his death, I said, understanding dawning. Exactly. Marcus knew that as long as he was alive, Castellano would never stop trying to control him. But if he died, and if the evidence became public, Castellano's empire would collapse. Detective Hoffman nodded. The files your father left contain enough evidence to convict Castellano and at least 30 of his associates on charges ranging from money laundering to murder. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? The evidence is encrypted, and the encryption key is biometric. It requires both DNA verification and retinal scanning from someone in Marcus's immediate family. I stared at him. Me. You're the only person who can access the files that will bring down the people who killed your parents. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. 18 years of living in ignorance, of thinking I was nobody special, and now I was the key to destroying a criminal empire. What happens to me after I unlock the files? I asked. If everything goes according to plan, Castellano and his organization are arrested and prosecuted, Patricia said. You testify at trial, help put them away permanently, and then you're free to live your life however you choose. And if things don't go according to plan? The silence that followed was answer enough. Eleanor pulled out one final document, a letter in Marcus's handwriting, addressed to me. He wanted you to read this before you made your decision. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Carolina, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and the truth about your identity has finally been revealed. I can only imagine how betrayed and confused you must feel right now, learning that everything you believed about your childhood was carefully constructed fiction. I want you to know that every choice I made was about protecting you, even the choice to stay away from you for most of your life. Watching you grow up from a distance, pretending to be your uncle instead of your father, was the hardest thing I've ever done. But seeing you become the remarkable woman you are today, strong, kind, creative, independent, made every sacrifice worthwhile. The evidence I've gathered against Vincent Castellano represents 15 years of my life. It's my attempt to balance the scales for all the harm I helped him cause when I was young and foolish enough to think I could control dangerous people. But more than that, it's my gift to you, the chance to live freely, without looking over your shoulder, without wondering if the people who destroyed our family will ever find you. You have a choice to make. You can walk away from all of this, take the money I've left you, and build a quiet life somewhere far from these complications. No one would blame you for choosing safety over justice. But if you choose to see this through, if you choose to be the weapon that finally destroys the people who killed your mother and stole your childhood, then you should know that you won't be alone. Patricia and Robert love you as much as any parents could. Sophia raised you with more wisdom and care than I ever could have provided. You have people who will fight for you, protect you, and help you rebuild whatever life you choose when this is over. The choice is yours, my brave daughter. But whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you beyond measure, and that love, real love, never abandons the people it cherishes, even when distance is necessary for their protection. Your father, Marcus. I folded the letter carefully and looked around the table at these people who had shaped my life from the shadows. The detective seeking justice, the lawyer executing a dead man's final wishes, the federal agents who had loved me enough to break my heart to save my life. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "Castellano's people are getting closer," Detective Hoffman said. "We estimate maybe 72 hours before they figure out where you are. And if I say yes, if I unlock the files, then we end this," Patricia said simply. Once and for all. The phone call came at 3 a.m., shattering the uneasy sleep I'd finally managed to find in the safe house. Detective Hoffman answered on the second ring, his voice sharp with alertness despite the hour. "Hoffman? What? Are you certain? Jesus Christ. We'll be right there." He hung up and turned to face the rest of us, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been hope. "Marcus Rivera was just admitted to UC San Francisco Medical Center under the name David Chen. He's alive." The words hit the room like a bomb. I shot upright from the couch where I'd been lying awake, my heart hammering against my ribs. "That's impossible," Eleanor said. "I saw the death certificate. I organized the funeral. The man they buried was Vincent Castellano's nephew, Tony," Hoffman explained, already moving toward the door. "Marcus has been in witness protection for 3 weeks, recovering from poisoning that nearly killed him. When he heard that Castellano's people were hunting for Callie, he broke protocol and contacted the FBI. The drive to San Francisco was a blur of highways and adrenaline. I sat in the back seat between Patricia and Robert, my mind reeling with the impossibility of what I'd just learned. Marcus was alive. My father, and I could finally think of him that way, was alive. "How?" I asked Robert. "How did he fake his death?" "Professional magic," Robert replied. "The kind of thing you can only pull off with federal cooperation and very careful planning. Marcus knew Castellano was getting suspicious, knew that staying visible was becoming too dangerous. So he worked with the FBI to stage his own assassination, using his enemy's nephew as a body double. Tony Castellano was already dying from cancer," Patricia explained. "The FBI made him an offer. His family would receive a substantial payment and protection if he helped them fake Marcus's death. Tony died naturally the day before Marcus was supposed to be killed. And Castellano believed it? Vincent Castellano attended Marcus's funeral," Hoffman said from the driver's seat. "He watched them lower what he thought was his enemy's body into the ground. As far as he knows, Marcus Rivera is dead and buried. The hospital was a maze of sterile corridors and antiseptic smells. Hoffman badged us through security, past suspicious nurses and protective federal agents, until we reached a private room on the 7th floor, and there he was. Marcus looked smaller than I remembered, paler, with tubes and monitors connected to his body, but his eyes were alert, and when he saw me standing in the doorway, they filled with tears. "Carolina," he whispered, and hearing my real name in his voice made something inside my chest break open. I approached his bed slowly, still afraid that this might be another deception, another careful construction designed to protect me from some greater truth. "Why?" I asked, when I was close enough to see the love and regret in his eyes. "Why let me think you were dead?" "Because I had to know if the evidence would be enough," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I had to know if my death would draw Castellano out of hiding and force him to make mistakes." "And did it?" Detective Hoffman stepped forward. "Vincent Castellano has been scrambling to consolidate power since Marcus's supposed death. He's been moving money, eliminating potential witnesses, basically panic cleaning his organization. Every move he's made has been monitored and documented. We have enough evidence now to destroy him completely," Patricia added. "But we still need your biometric access to the encrypted files." Marcus reached for my hand with fingers that were warm and real and alive. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry for every lie, every moment of pain, every year of thinking you were alone in the world." "I wasn't alone," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Sophia raised me. Patricia and Robert loved me. Eleanor protected your interests. Even when I thought everyone had abandoned me, I was surrounded by people who cared." "That's not accident," Marcus said. "That's the family we chose for you. What happens now?" "Now we finish this," said a new voice from the doorway. I turned to see a young woman about my age, with dark hair and Marcus's eyes, wearing a FBI jacket over jeans and a t-shirt. "Callie, meet your half-sister, Nina Rivera," Marcus said. "She's been working undercover in Castellano's organization for the past 2 years." Nina stepped into the room, and I saw the family resemblance immediately, not just in our physical features, but in the way she carried herself, the intelligence in her eyes, the careful assessment of threats and opportunities. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you," Nina said, "and I've been waiting even longer to help destroy the people who killed our family." "Our family? Marcus is my father too," she explained. Different mother, but same protective instincts. When I turned 18, I demanded to know the truth about why I'd been raised in hiding. When I found out about Castellano, about what happened to your mother, I insisted on joining the investigation. Marcus smiled weakly. Both my daughters inherited Carmen's sense of justice and her complete inability to back down from dangerous situations. So what's the plan? I asked. Nina and Detective Hoffman exchanged glances. Tomorrow night, Vincent Castellano is hosting a charity gala at his estate in Napa Valley. Every major figure in his organization will be there. And that's where we're going to end this, once and for all. The charity gala was a monument to criminal wealth disguised as philanthropy, held in Vincent Castellano's Napa Valley estate that sprawled across 50 acres of vineyard and manicured gardens. From my position in the FBI surveillance van parked a mile away, I watched through hidden cameras as hundreds of elegantly dressed criminals and their unwitting legitimate business partners mingled under crystal chandeliers. Target acquired, Nina's voice came through my earpiece. She was inside the party, wearing a stunning black dress and carrying a purse that contained recording equipment sophisticated enough to document every conversation within 20 feet. Castellano is holding court near the auction tables. I studied the monitors showing Vincent Castellano for the first time in person rather than photographs. He was smaller than I'd expected, but carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting away with murder, literally. Remember, Detective Hoffman said, adjusting his own earpiece, we need him to confess to Marcus's supposed murder and to ordering your mother's death. Without those confessions, he might beat the money laundering charges. How exactly am I supposed to get him to confess to killing people he thinks are already dead? I asked. By making him think you're a threat to everything he's built, Marcus said from the hospital bed that had been set up in the surveillance van. Against all medical advice and FBI protocols, he'd insisted on being present for Castellano's takedown, by making him angry enough to tell the truth. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Nina would create a distraction that would draw Castellano into the estate's private study, where I would be waiting. Hidden cameras and microphones would record everything, while federal agents surrounded the property to prevent escape. What if he just kills me instead of confessing? I asked. He won't, Marcus said with certainty. Vincent's weakness has always been his ego. He needs people to understand how clever he is, how many moves ahead he's always thinking. When he sees you alive, when he realizes that everything he believed about Marcus's death was a lie, he'll want to explain exactly how he's going to fix the situation. And that's when we get him. At exactly 10 p.m., Nina excused herself from a conversation with Castellano's lieutenant and made her way toward the study. Moving into position, she whispered. I took a deep breath and slipped out of the van, making my way through the darkened vineyards toward the estate's back entrance. Patricia and Robert flanked me, professional bodyguards once again, their faces grim with concentration. We'll be right outside the study, Patricia whispered, as we reached the servants' entrance that Nina had unlocked from inside. Any sign of trouble? Any indication that things are going wrong? And we're coming in. I know. Callie, Robert caught my arm as I reached for the door handle. For what it's worth, we're proud of you. Regardless of how this turns out tonight, we're proud of the woman you've become. I made my way through the estate's service corridors, past catering staff who were too busy to notice one more person in dark clothing. The study was exactly where Nina had described it, down a hallway lined with expensive art, behind heavy oak doors that muffled the sounds of the party. I settled into the leather chair behind Castellano's desk and waited. 20 minutes later, I heard Nina's voice in the hallway, pitched to Carrie. Mr. Castellano, there's something in your study you need to see immediately. It's about the Rivera situation. The door opened, and Vincent Castellano walked into his study expecting to find a problem he could solve with money or violence. Instead, he found me sitting behind his desk, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Hello, Vincent, I said. I believe you knew my parents, Marcus Rivera and Carmen Delgado. For a moment, his composure slipped completely. I saw genuine shock, then fear, then the rapid calculation of a man who'd built his life on adapting to unexpected situations. You're supposed to be dead, he said finally. So is my father, but here we are. Castellano moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself a whiskey with hands that trembled slightly. Carolina Rivera. I should have known Marcus was too smart to let his daughter actually die in the system. Smart enough to fake his own death too, apparently. Yes, that was unexpected, though I have to admire the artistry of it. He turned to face me, his composure fully restored. Tony always said he wanted to be useful to the family. I suppose this was his final contribution. You're confessing to murdering your own nephew? Castellano laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Tony was dying anyway. Cancer. If Marcus and his FBI friends wanted to use Tony's corpse to stage a dramatic death scene, who was I to object? Besides, it gave me exactly what I wanted. Confirmation that Marcus Rivera was finally gone. And my mother? Was killing Carmen Delgado also just business? Your mother was a threat to everything I'd built. She and Marcus had gathered enough evidence to destroy my organization. Yes, I had her killed. It was remarkably easy, a simple brake line modification, completely untraceable. The confession hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. And now I have to decide what to do with Marcus Rivera's daughter, who apparently inherited his talent for causing problems. The FBI stormed Castellano's study 3 minutes after he confessed to my mother's murder, their entrance so swift and coordinated that he barely had time to reach for the gun hidden in his desk drawer. Detective Hoffman's voice filled the room as agents secured the scene. Vincent Castellano, you are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, money laundering, and about 30 other charges we'll get to later. I watched from my chair as they cuffed him, this man who had destroyed my family and shaped my entire life through his violence. He looked smaller now, diminished by the reality of consequences catching up to him after decades of impunity. You think this ends anything? Castellano said as they led him toward the door. You think putting me in prison changes what you are? What am I? I asked. The daughter of a money launderer and a dead idealist. Marcus Rivera was just like me, Carolina. The only difference is that he got sentimental. No, I said, standing up from behind his desk. The difference is that he chose love over fear, and that makes all the difference in the world. The aftermath was a blur of federal agents, evidence collection, and media attention that I was carefully shielded from. Nina and I spent hours giving statements while Marcus was transferred to a proper hospital room where he could begin the long process of recovering from both poison and the psychological toll of living in hiding. It was Sophia who appeared first at the hospital, having driven through the night from Portland as soon as she learned what was happening. She burst into Marcus's room like a small hurricane, her eyes fierce with protective fury. Marcus Rivera, she said, pointing an accusatory finger at him. You have a lot of explaining to do. Sophia, do you have any idea what this child has been through? Do you understand the damage that abandonment causes? The years of therapy, the trust issues, the constant fear that everyone she loves will disappear. I watched this tiny woman dress down my father, this man who had outwitted criminal organizations and federal agencies, and saw him accept her anger with the grace of someone who knew he deserved every word. You're right, he said simply. I caused her immeasurable pain. Yes, you did. And now you need to figure out how to heal it. Sophia turned to me, her expression softening. Mija, are you okay? I think so, I said, and meant it. Sophia, I want you to meet my father. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. Sophia grilled Marcus about his intentions, his health, his plans for the future. She demanded to know how he intended to rebuild a relationship with a daughter he'd been forced to love from a distance. I don't expect forgiveness, Marcus told her. I don't expect to reclaim years that can't be recovered. I just want the chance to know the woman my daughter has become. She's remarkable, Sophia said simply. Strong, creative, compassionate. Everything you could hope for in a child. I know. I've been watching. Over the following weeks, as federal prosecutors built their case against Castellano and his organization, I found myself navigating a new kind of family structure. Marcus was recovering in a rented house in Portland, carefully rebuilding his strength while getting to know me as an adult. Nina visited regularly, and we discovered the strange joy of having a sister who understood the complexity of loving a father who'd made impossible choices. Patricia and Robert were there too, no longer hiding their affection behind professional distance. They'd resigned from federal service and were trying to figure out how to be part of my life without the structure of a protection assignment. We know we're not your parents, Patricia said one evening, as we all gathered for dinner at Sophia's house, but we'd like to be something, whatever you're comfortable with us being. You are my parents, I said, surprising myself with the words. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. You loved me when loving me was dangerous. You sacrificed your own happiness to keep me safe. That makes you family. Jake, who had spent the past month adjusting to the revelation that his girlfriend was secretly the heir to a criminal fortune and the key witness in a federal prosecution, raised his wine glass. To complicated families. To chosen families, Sophia corrected. To families that love each other despite everything, Marcus added quietly. As we toasted around Sophia's kitchen table, I realized that this was what happiness felt like. not the absence of pain or complication, but the presence of people who chose to love you despite both. The $15 million was still there, along with the beach house in Mendocino that I was planning to share with Sophia in her retirement. But the real inheritance Marcus had left me wasn't money. It was the understanding that family isn't about blood or biology or perfect circumstances. It's about the people who show up, who stay, who fight for you, even when fighting means making impossible choices. Nina caught my eye across the table and smiled. So, sister, what do we do now? I looked around at this group of people who had shaped my life through love disguised as abandonment, protection disguised as betrayal, and sacrifice disguised as selfishness. Now, I said, we figure out how to be a family.